Hello everyone, I'm Inverse, and on today's episode of StratTalk, we are going to take a look at how to counter the Wehrmacht forward HQ opening on Angoville, with the American player starting from the north starting position. This is a fairly unique strategy that a Wehrmacht player can employ, but isn't necessarily uncommon. A lot of Wehrmacht players like this style from the south, simply because it gives you good control of the right-hand side, it gives you a lot of early infantry, and it transitions well into a number of follow-ups, be that vet grenadiers with med bunkers, or very, very quick tier 3 tech. Now, this is going to be a quicker episode. This is going to be a one replay episode. We're just going to look at the general principle behind how I like to counter this strategy. It's by no means the only way to do it. You'll see, depending on how far back you go, people trying weapon support center based plays to counter this. People trying a lot of different things. People, of course, trying what I'm going to show you today. And there's success stories and there's failures with all of these methods of countering this strategy. It's definitely not the end-all be-all, the be-all end-all rather, of counters for the forward HQ strat, but it is what I prefer and what I use most often. So with that in mind, where's my pause button? There we go. I pressed print screen earlier accidentally. Don't want to do that again. So let's get into the game. This is a game between myself and Macaroni, playing under Le Professionnel. Professionnel, perhaps. Rolling the R's. My French is absolutely terrible. But anyways, now there's two phases. There's two kind of stages to countering a strategy such as this, and they should both be built into any opening you do on Angoville. Now the first one is scouting. The second one is taking that scouting information and knowing how to react. Now scouting will come into play primarily with this first rifle squad we see building right here. This is the standard barrack placement. I'm not going to go into too much depth about capping order and stuff like that. If you're going for a 2-engineer start, you're pretty much doing stuff standard regardless, and any slight variations aren't too big of a deal. Now what this first rifle squad is going to do is it's going to cap this cutoff, which is going to link up this munitions, get the munitions rolling, and then it's going to move down into this area. And this is a very important moment in the game. Some players like to send that rifle over here to perhaps support this engineer. Some people like to send that rifle back over here to cap. I am of the belief that the absolute best thing to do is to cap this point and then move right down here, because this gives you a lot of information. First of all, you of course get this cap, so you get connection with this munitions point. Second of all, you get to see one of two things, or nothing at all. That's a forward HQ, which we're going to see in forward HQ right there. We can also see, if it were happening, wire tank traps right here, which could give you further information on what your opponent is doing. In this case, we know it's a forward HQ opening. If we had seen wire or tank traps there, perhaps our opponent is doing a very aggressive right-hand side strategy and is going to be looking to cut us off, or at least attempt to cut us off. These are both situations that require unique responses by you as the American player, and they're situations that you need to know you're going to be up against in order to counter them properly. Now what you see me doing right here is focusing a lot on my cutoff. This is going to be the crux of my defense until I have the tech and the units I need to combat what my opponent is doing. Now as we see, very aggressive Volk squad push out on the right hand side. This is perfectly fine. The right hand side, cap up as much as you can with that first engineer squad. You want to retreat that squad as early as possible and take as little damage on him as possible. Now as we see right here, Volk squads poking over and seeing what's up here. This is why it's so incredibly important. I'm just going to pause the game for a second and just talk a little bit about the theory behind defending this cutoff point and playing as passively as we're playing right now. First of all, you want this engineer squad with as much health as possible, because we're going to need 2 engineer upgrades in order to beat this strategy. We're going to need a flamer, which will come first, and then we're going to need a minesweeper, because the only thing that can really defend against this is well-placed mine spam, because we have a Fort HQ, right? We don't have any MGs, we don't have any snipers. We have Volks and Pioneers. There's no suppression, so we don't have to worry about blobbing. Blobbing is perfectly fine because you're not going to hit any MGs, anything like that. The only thing that can suppress you and hurt a blob is mines, which is why we want to mix in a minesweeper. But we'll get into that a bit later when the time actually comes to research that upgrade. Now, the reason for defending this cutoff so heavily is precisely because of that little Volk squad poke we saw just now. Now, if our opponent's able to secure our cutoff, that's trouble for us in two different ways. First of all, he has all this green cover of all of these haystacks, and that's very difficult to break and very difficult to push in. Even with flamers, it's very easy for a lot of Volk squads to focus down a single flamer squad, and then you have a bunch of Volk squads in green cover against charging rifles, and that's really not a good situation for the rifle squads. It's far easier to focus fire when you have stationary squads, because they're already in cover, so you don't have to wait until they're in cover to issue the focus fire order. So it gives the Wehrmacht player an advantage in that regard. Of course, they're already in cover, so you're not worrying about closing the distance to get into cover, and the Volk squads aren't moving, so they're of course more accurate. Second of all, we have this very close reinforced point. This is very problematic if you allow your opponent to get your cutoff. Your opponent can reinforce right here, he can rebuild more Volk squads, a lot of things like that. It becomes very difficult once you've lost this cutoff to actually regain it for yourself, which is why we're emphasizing so much at this point in the game defending the cutoff. We don't care about this right hand side, this is going to come later. The main crux of our attention should be on the center. Now, if you'll notice, or if you noticed, my very first rifle squad poked over here just a little bit, a little earlier. This is something you generally want to do as well, because if your opponent elected to send a Pioneer squad over to this left-hand side, perhaps cap these points down here and see how far he can get up here. After you've capped this point and you head down here with your rifle, if you head straight over here, you're going to see this point either capping or already capped, and that's going to be an indication to you that you might want to divert that rifle squad over just a little bit to deal at least some damage to that Pioneer in order to make it easier for this engineer squad to take it out and cap up the right hand side as much as possible. Now, as we see the points we're capping, or the points we capped on the right hand side, this plus 16 fuel is as far as we go in terms of resource points. Then this VP, and then we can kind of move in here, cap this, and then move up a little bit more. Now, as we see, another slight push in with the Volk squads, but we're in a very good position right here. We don't have anything to worry about. If our opponent pushes in, he's not going to be able to break us, because we'll be able to focus fire, and we essentially have the advantage that the Wehrmacht player would have, were we to allow him to get this nice offensive position. Now, we don't want to be taking too much damage right here. You'll notice our opponent is actually focusing down on this flamer squad, and this is going to force a slightly different reaction out of me. Usually, actually, first of all, we have bars coming. Bars is essential to this as well. Usually what I do is I push straight through here. This is the shortest avenue of attack, and though it is across red cover, you are able to belay a lot of the damage by hiding behind these hedgerows. Now, instead of going through there, this game I went over here, and the main reason for that was so I could pass by my barracks and reinforce this flamer squad. Generally, I would go this way. However, going this way, definitely not a bad idea. In fact, in many ways could be superior, and especially in this situation, since our opponent, our Wehrmacht opponent, is slightly out of position and decently far away from the forward HQ. If you can split your opponent up and attack with your full force against part of his force, that's obviously better and ideal. Though of course you can't always rely on something like that. Now, as we see, the moment bars pop, which is right now, we're going to be pushing in with our rifle squads, everyone at once. Rifle squad flamer for any units in buildings. Of course, you have to worry about that flamer as well as your minesweeper squad getting focused down. You want your minesweeper in the middle, not at the very front because that makes it very easy to focus fire, but not too far back that your leading rifle squads may hit a mine that won't be detected by your minesweeper squad. So as we see, watching this play out, our opponent's away from his forward HQ. You'll notice he's focusing down on the minesweeper squad. We're actually probably going to lose that minesweeper. No, he's going to survive. Nope, he died. Never mind. But this is an ideal situation for countering this strategy. Generally, it's a little bit more difficult because we have our opponent near a reinforced point. However, in this situation, always want to focus down Volk squads as much as possible. And as we see right there, fairly one-sided in this situation. Of course, you can't always rely on catching your opponent out of position. However, the same principles apply. You still want to be grouping up like that. You still want to be attacking the moment your bars hit. You still want to have your minesweeper squad in there as much as possible. And after you force your opponent to retreat, push your opponent out, stuff like that, you want to head straight for their forward HQ. There's a few things you want to do, and it can be kind of difficult and not always clear what you want to be doing in a situation like this. Now, I'm going to pause it for another second and just say you may be very tempted to cap around the map. That's a very natural response to a strategy like this when you see your opponent with so much of the map at a point in the game such as this. However, if your opponent is smart and he's attacking up here, he's staying up here, he's defending up here, and he's pushing in, or rather retreating with his entire force and then pushing out instantly, you want as much of your force forward and on this area as possible. Now, of course, in my situation, in this situation, a lot of Volk squads were lost, so it was a little bit safer for me to divert this rifle squad over here. However, you'll notice I kept 3 of my rifle squads near the forward HQ. Because if our opponent pushes forward, remember, he can reinforce from this point. If he pushes forward, even if he's lost a few men, if he can keep this forward HQ, he's going to be able to keep his territory. And if he can keep his territory, look at all the fuel, look at all the munitions, and look at all the points in general that our opponent has. This isn't a good situation for an American player to be in, especially after a very resource-intensive attack, which a bar flank is. It's a very costly and very expensive investment in an early tech that is dangerous. And that's one problem with this strategy, and it's the reason why myself and why a lot of other Wehrmacht players actually don't like using this strategy, because it's a very big coin flip. It's a huge gamble, because if you as the Wehrmacht player, in Macaroni's situation here, say he pulls back, say he's defending around his forward HQ, he's in an ideal situation. He's still not guaranteed to defend this attack. He has to focus fire perfectly. He may have to get lucky with a few dice rolls. He has to make sure he's microing his infantry perfectly, retreating at the correct times, not retreating too early but not retreating too late. And if he doesn't do all of that perfectly, he's still going to lose the game. Myself as the American player, I'm in this situation taking a bit of a gamble as well. I'm saying the odds are it's better for me if I attack right now than it is for you. If we played this out 100 times, I'm going to win this engagement, and consequently I'm going to win the game more than half of those times. And against a strategy like this, where the alternative is, hey, you sit back, you maybe tech up a little bit, but what does that do? You tech up to, say M8. Well, your opponent has a ton of Volks. He's on Angoville. He has a ton of munitions. We look at these plus 16s right here. He's got these 2 plus 16s. He's got this plus 10. Perhaps you keep this plus 10, but still, if you keep this plus 10, he's got this plus 10. He's got a lot of munitions at his disposal, and that means a lot of Fausts, a lot of mines. If he goes tier 2 and you go motor pool, you are in a lot of trouble. On the other hand, if you fail an attack such as this, and your opponent goes tier 3, you can potentially be in a lot of trouble as well. So it's kind of playing percentages, and that's why I said there's not necessarily one by-the-book way to counter a strategy like this. This is my by-the-book counter. This is pretty much my textbook example of how I like to counter a strategy such as this. I think it gives me personally the best chance of winning any game that's played like this. Of course, you may feel otherwise, you may like this. I strongly encourage you to try this out and tweak it to your liking. Of course, tweak it too much and you've got something entirely different, and you may have trouble with that as well. But that's just my general thought. And you always want to be pushing up forward as much as possible, because you don't want your opponent to be able to push up here too far. You always want to be able to keep your opponent fighting down here with less than full health squads, which is what I'm attempting to do right here. Focusing down, of course, the units outside of the forward HQ. Now in this situation it's far easier, obviously, as I've stated multiple times, simply because of the sheer number of units my opponent has lost. But once we've decapped, all that fun stuff, the game's pretty much over at this point if you're able to decap the forward HQ. And this game, in fact, is going to be over, as we see right there. However, if the game doesn't end at this situation, there's a few follow-ups you generally want to keep in mind as options going forward. Now, a lot of this depends on your manpower drain and on how well you fought this first engagement. You can absolutely come back and recover from a less than ideal attack on your opponent's forward HQ. Of course, ideally, and in most situations, you're going to be able to do enough damage to your opponent where that's pretty much the game. Of course, if that's not the case, you have a few options at your disposal. If your opponent shows veterancy and shows some sort of infantry text, so in this case it would be almost always tier 2 off of that, you can transition into very heavy anti-infantry. Of course, you already have the bar upgrade. You can transition into multiple sniper in a situation such as that. What you have to do in all situations is overreact to what your opponent is doing. You can't just kind of say, I'll get a little bit of snipers, and maybe I'll get a vehicle in a situation such as this. This is a very hardline strategy, what your Wehrmacht player is doing, and you have to respond to it as such. If your opponent is investing in anti-infantry, you need to be, or investing in infantry rather, you need to be investing in anti-infantry. And in this situation, that means multiple snipers, that means triage center, supply yard upgrades, stuff like that. On the other hand, if your opponent doesn't show any tech, you need to be very aware, especially if your opponent's been able to hold his cutoff and hold his forward HQ. You need to be aware of tier 3 as the probable follow-up. Volks are very cheap to reinforce. Angoville is a map with a lot of fuel, and if you as the American player failed in your first assault, your opponent's going to have that fuel for a lot longer than you would like him to have it, and that's a great situation for tier 3 from a Wehrmacht player. In that situation, ideally you're going to want tank depot. Of course, this is very general theory crafting type stuff, and obviously every game is different, but that should be your goal. Tank depot in almost all situations. Mostly, even in situations where your opponent may follow up with tier 2, tank depot never a bad idea in this situation. Simply because Volks are absolutely useless against Shermans, and Shermans are very good against almost anything your opponent can produce in response to this strategy. And as I said earlier, that's going to be a fairly quick episode. I am looking into more strategies to be doing for my StratTalk episodes. I've been playing and practicing a lot in preparation for Sunday night fights. I played in the first qualifier and lost to Aimstrong in the quarterfinals, and I've been invited to the next qualifier, so I will be practicing a lot. I'll hopefully be posting videos as well. I do, however, need to get some material and need to find some more strategies that I like so that I can play them, practice them, and then talk about them on here. But aside from that, just one kind of public service announcement in case you guys haven't heard, haven't known, haven't found out. There is a new Company of Heroes community site that was very recently launched. It is co2.org. That's coh2.org. O-R-G. It's primarily a Company of Heroes 2 community site. It is the home of Sunday Night Fights, and I encourage each and every one of you to go check it out, go register your account, post in the new members section, say hello, say I sent you, because all that fun stuff. Check out Sunday Night Fights. That's the hub of Sunday Night Fights. You'll find all the replays, replay packs there, the commentaries, all that fun stuff, schedules, signups if you want to play, all that fun stuff. So I strongly encourage you to check that out, and I will hopefully be back in the very near future with some more stuff. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you next time.